The NIV says, then God said, let us make mankind in our image. I would make it as our image. I don't think the word in is helpful. I don't think it conveys what's really going on in the Hebrew. So let us make mankind as our image, as our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind as his own image. As the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. I think in order for us to understand what a biblical author is saying, we need to understand what conversation are they part of. There's two aspects of doing that. One is to investigate the use of these words in all the other texts in the Bible where they're used. But the other is to investigate how these words appear in cognate languages. So I think for this particular question, a lack of attention to the ancient Near East has spawned these very non-concrete views of the image, like thinking of it as relationality, rationality, morality, these sort of intangible things. Those seem like a Platonic sort of post-New Testament way of thinking about image. Whereas if we go back and look at how ancient Near Eastern peoples thought about images, and we look for the word image, which is the Hebrew word selim, and in Akkadian it's salmu, and we have a similar concept in Egyptian. If we pay attention to that, we see everywhere it's something concrete. We're talking about the idol. I don't have any idols in my office, but I'll just grab a concrete thing here. I have a willow tree figurine. So like we're talking about like an actual figure that's made of something concrete and material. That's what a tselem is. And in most cases, there would be when somebody, well, in every case other than the ancient Israelites, when somebody sets up a tabernacle or temple for the worship of the god, they put a physical statue in the holy place, in the most holy place, and that's a tselem. So I think it's really important for us to know that. Otherwise, we kind of spin off into our own logo. Here's what I think it is, instead of really recognizing in that context, what would this have meant to the first people? So there's a couple of different ways that the ancient Near East helps us with this. I'm drawing here on Richard Middleton's book. This was also his dissertation, The Liberating Image. And he talks about he goes through all the possible parallel texts and then identifies two that are most relevant, two clusters of texts. One is where kings are the image of God. So there are a number of texts that refer to kings as being the image of God, not referring to regular people as the image of God. And what was meant by that seems to be that they're some kind of cultic intermediary. So if the king is God's image, they're like representing the presence of God to their particular area. And so then if you set that alongside scripture, you see, oh, we have something different here. Every human being is the image of God, not just the king. So there's a democratization of it. And yet the representational presence aspect is still true of what the Bible, I think, means when it talks about image. Then the other cluster of texts is one where kings set up images of themselves in order to represent themselves in some way. So Middleton says it's hard to be really sure what they thought they were doing when they set up images of themselves. But like when a king would conquer his territory, he would often put a statue of himself kind of on the far borders. And many times people have talked about that as a way of representing his authority. Like, I can't be everywhere at once, but I'm going to let this statue remind people I'm in charge here, and people better be loyal to me. So a lot of people have used that example, and I've used that example, but it's not super clear that authority is what is being communicated there. It could be, some consider those statues to be a votive statue, like it's a way of indicating their prayerfulness or gratitude to the gods for the land. And so either way, whether it's authority or whether it's like representing him in worship, either way, it's representing the king. So that's the sort of piece that we can clearly take across to Scripture that that images are representative in some way, and that fits with this idea of kings being the image of God. So I think the main takeaway, to circle back to your question, like how should the ancient Near Eastern context influence the way we read the Bible or how we understand image of God? I think it helps us guard against reading modern philosophical notions into the Bible, and just helps us to see, like, what would it have meant in that time?
Hey chat, subscribing to our YouTube channel allows us to help our watchers understand the Bible better. Thanks to your help, we have already reached thousands of people in their walk with Christ. If you'd like to help further our efforts, tap the subscribe button, which will allow us to reach even more people.
You forgot to tell them to turn on bell notifications.
Wait, they have to subscribe and click a bell now?
I think I would group the views out there on image of God into three main categories. There are people who think that for humans to be made in God's image indicates some kind of capacity that we have. There are some that say it's pointing to a particular function that we have. And then there's others who say, no, it's our identity. So in the capacity category, there's those who argue that the image of God is primarily talking about our rationality, like we're different from animals because we're rational creatures, or our morality, we have this sense of right and wrong, or our relationality, we're a highly relational species. The more biologists study creatures, the more they can find that we actually do things for other people. We do things for people we don't know, like Zach, you and I have never met, but I agreed to be on your channel even though you're not paying me, right? So that's like that's a unique thing about humans, that we will do things for people that we don't know. So we're highly relational. So all of those views of the image of God are focusing on something we possess: our mind, our will, our relationality. Then there's those who say, no, it's more something that we do. The image of God implies something that we do, like rule over creation or whatever. And then there's another, maybe more recent stream of scholars who are saying, actually, function and capacity are both wrong. Identity is really where it's at. We are the image of God. It's something we are. It's not something we possess, because there's ethical conundrums that come up. If it's something we possess, then what happens if tomorrow I get into a car accident and I'm totally incapacitated and unable to communicate? Does that mean I'm no longer the image of God, or has the image of God been distorted or lost in some way? And so some scholars, led by John Kilner from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, he's one of the big voices in this conversation. He's a theologian, and he says, no, the image of God cannot be lost or destroyed in any way. And every human being is fully the image of God. It's not a capacity that we have in differing amounts. And if you're talking about capacity, or if you're talking about function, then you have to account for what about when people can't do the function or don't have the full capacity. So these other scholars say, no, identity is a better way of talking about the image of God. I follow Ryan Peterson in seeing the image as our human identity that cannot be lost or destroyed. And I think what I got from Catherine McDowell's book, her book this is her Harvard dissertation, The Image of God in the Garden of Eden, the very long subtitle. She helped me see that identity has to do with kinship, that we actually, as humans, we're related to God in a way that animals are not. And that came out of Genesis chapter 5, primarily, where there's an analogy made between Adam's connection with his son Seth and humans' connection with Yahweh. And so Seth is the image of Adam, just like we are the image of God. And that analogy shows us that there's something similar about being parent and child to us being human. So my view of the image of God is that it is our human identity, and that identity involves kinship with Yahweh, and it has implications for our vocation. And that that vocation I would describe as a representative rulership. So there's the kinship aspect and there's kingship aspect, that we are functioning kind of like kings ruling on God's behalf. So we have a responsibility over creation. And then one last piece I'd add to my kind of definition of image of God is something that I find really interesting in Genesis 2, when God gives the first man and the first woman, the duty, or Genesis 1, actually, end of Genesis 1, when he gives them the status as his image, he tells them to rule over creation, but he does not tell them to rule over each other. So there's a kind of democratization and but there's a partnership. Partnership is a better word, between men and women in carrying out that vocation that's implied by our status.